Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, an inspired conversation space between Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner on the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness.
We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory. We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively, head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper. And for all live-streamed pre-release podcasts and all our free content, head over to our free Facebook group, Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is the evolution of holding space as your children grow. Our intention here is just to give an overview of how you might consider that the practice of holding space and emotional meeting for and with our children changes from infancy to preschool to school to high school, and that over the evolution of their life, how we be with them and listen shifts and changes. So we just want to kind of give an overview of lived experience from that perspective to empower your journey.
Yeah, it's such a great conversation to have, because I think a lot of parents who really have a high value on parenting are really well versed in what it means to hold space and listen to feelings in those early years, and really understand what it's like to see and witness and be with a toddler tantrum, for example. But that as our children grow, that can look different, and it can hit up new edges for us, and it can sometimes make us feel a little bit wobbly about how to meet it, because if their tears don't come easily, then how do we kind of stay with that? Or if there's aggression, how can we keep ourselves safe but not shut down their aggression so that they further internalize it? So there's just a little more nuance, I think, that is helpful for us to kind of tease out. So that's where we want to take it.
Well, let's begin with infancy. So we're talking under ones here. How have you learned to hold space with an under one?
Yeah, so an under one, if we imagine that their communication is going to be largely through tears or their face expression or noises, or how they hold their body, because if there's rigidity in their body, for example, or if they're pushing or kicking, then we can sense that they've got some tension that they might need to release, for example. And so holding space would look for me like slowing my attention right down to tune into what's going on for them, and have I call it like have a foot in their experience, like be able to let myself feel what's going on for them, but not lose myself so much in their experience that I'm anxious or stressed or set off myself based on their, crying, for example. This is like such a practice, though, I've got to say. Like, I think if you're new to holding space, I really send you so much love and gentleness, because it certainly took, and I'm sure it did for you, Julie, it took me a long time to learn to be okay with tears.
Yeah, totally.
As not something that
meant something was wrong. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And with my son, I just kept putting him on the breast.
Me
boo,
too.
Boo, 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 boo. So I never listened to him. I just kept shoving something in his mouth.
Oh God, me too. And I just fed, like, I remember at one point I have a visceral remember I couldn't handle Hugo's crying at all, because and it must be like and in fact, my mum shared this with me. She's like, I just would have put you in a room and closed the door, was how she said what she said to me once when I was walking around with him trying to rock him at the same time as breastfeed him, like just doing anything I could.
I remember doing that too.
I was just desperate because I couldn't bear the what happened in my body when he cried, because it tapped me right back into that inner child that I didn't know was there, that inner baby who had been left to cry.
Totally.
So if you are there, I just send you so much compassion, because it is a rite of passage, I think, for so many women to feel the setup of that and feel how it turns you inside out. The grief of that, right?
Yes. Well, really, what I came to recognize that practice of was really recognizing that I needed to hold my own inner infant so that I could be the mother that this child needed, because or else I was a child parenting a child.
Yeah. And so can you share what that meant for you to hold your own inner infant?
Well, I really noticed it the most as a practice. I suppose what I remember most is, well, certainly with Heath, with every other child, I had upskilled myself and done all of the courses and the places to learn it. So it was much more easeful. The more support I had, the more I understood the philosophy, the more embodied I was in the practices, and the more that I met my own inner child, the more stress left my body, the more tension left my body, which meant I literally was just more grounded, more open, more available, more connected. Like the virtue of doing your work on yourself is literally that it creates spaciousness to be with the ways that you want to be with your child. So I'll focus specifically on Heath. And around sleep, it was the hardest thing for me with sleep. So I can remember not even being able to let him whimper or make a rustle or a noise or a sound, because it meant he was going to wake up, and I was like on this hypervigilant, high alert, high anxiety kind of state. He could never settle, or in inverted commas, my perception at the time was that he couldn't settle through that 45 minute sleep cycle. He wasn't a baby who could do that. I didn't trust that. And so I had to really learn how to trust him and let him do the smallest sounds and movements and wriggles and grunts and noises and low level kind of that sort of whingy, whimpery sound that I used to think meant suffering. And I came to realize was just part of him vocalizing what was happening in his body that he could feel. And there was nothing inherently wrong with that. There was nothing for me to fix. There was nothing for me to change. And there was certainly nothing for me to stop.
Yeah.
So that took a huge process to work out. And then I literally remember I used to literally stand outside his door where he was sleeping at like 35 minutes, ready for the practice.
Yeah. What it is.
Yeah. And so I would literally hold my own heart, breathe so consciously and so deeply while I listened to him outside of the door going, he's really safe. This is really beautiful for him to be with his body. You're really safe. You are loving him in every way that you can. And in my mind, I would, and of course, we're quantumly entangled, so I would energetically, wrap him in colors and, send all of that love and really feel the connection that I had and the ability that I had to trust him and his body more than what I had learned, which I think was probably my overriding principle, was that I knew better and it was my job to do things to him,
Yeah.
So that for me is what I think about was my biggest practice in learning how to have children that could self-settle, because I was fairly sure in the attachment parenting world that if children could self-settle, it was because they were repressed. There was something wrong with the way that they had been parented that would stunt them for life. I don't believe that anymore, but I can certainly see that's where my belief system was coming from, and that running from a mother wound, of course, it was my job to do everything.
And also the other big belief system that I had too was that if you let them to cry at all, that their cortisol levels would get really high and then they wouldn't be able to come down again.
Yeah.
And so again, there's this fear of causing irreparable damage in some way to my child, which all just taps into that hypervigilance that anyone with any level of wounding or trauma, which is a lot of people, hypervigilance can become a natural state until we learn to be with that inner child and do that inner holding that you're talking about.
Yeah, totally. So when we think about infants, what we're really thinking about is remembering that this is our first foray into what is essentially an implicit memory. So it's a body-based memory. We won't necessarily have conscious memories, which sometimes as we're older makes it easier because we can go, well, how was 3-year-old me treated? Oh, I have a memory of this moment when my mum or dad or whoever did this. That's sometimes easier for us to intellectually understand, that creates more spaciousness to be with our children than when it's implicit and we don't have conscious memory of it, but we have memory or trauma, or like the body doesn't forget.
Yes. And so when it's implicit, sometimes it can almost just register as more terror because we can't put words to it. There's not that regulatory function that having a cognitive understanding of something can sometimes bring. That's missing.
Yeah. So I think it's a real invitation into trusting your body is leading you exactly where you need to go, and that the very desire that you have to create children who are self-autonomous, who have sovereignty over their own physicality and their own body and their own choices, means this process that you equally give yourself those things. I trust my body. I trust its responses. This is in my body, happening for my body and for everything that I'm wanting in the world. This is just what's coming up in the way or on the way of that. So trusting your own body to the degree that you want your children to trust their body, and at the same time, trusting that your children have everything that they need to move through this moment, and that your job is to allow that process to naturally unfold and only enter or inject yourself into their own experience when it really is needed, as opposed to a reflex based on your own child wounding.
Which is the ultimate practice, right? Because
even as I said that, I was like, did that even make sense?
Well, it does. But again, like, this is us coming at it in a cognitive way with a best practice, which we also have to acknowledge is not going to happen all the time because we live subconsciously so much. That is why examining like our narratives and not going, oh, I know this is a big edge for me. I know based on X, Y, Z of my childhood or how I'm perceiving this child in front of me right now that I'm going to habitually do this thing.
Yes.
As a compensation for my inner child.
Yeah.
Just so we know, oh, hey, Patton, I'm seeing you.
Yeah.
Now that I see you, how can we work with this in a more conscious way that allows me choice? Because until we bring awareness to it, we don't really have any choice over it. Right.
So cognitively being able to offer yourself an expansion in perception, which builds more spaciousness in the body. And also an infancy in holding space is just learning how to actually be with intensity in your physical body. Because you can't create spaciousness unless you've kind of emptied out what's filling you up.
Yeah.
So I think those two practices are what are pivotal when we're talking about holding space for the infant years. Would you add anything to that?
No, I would also just add that if you feel like you're on your second or your third child and this is all still really hard, then I just totally see you, because I think that each child touches those implicit memories in us in different ways.
Totally.
And that learning how to be with that part of ourselves and this child in front of us is a dance all of the time. But it's about valuing the purpose of that dance for us, which means us valuing our mothering, the experience of mothering ourselves as we mother our child, so that we give ourselves the support and the scaffolding that we need to be able to do that thing.
Yeah, 100%. So if we move beyond infancy, then we move to the toddler years, which I often think are the most intense for holding space.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it gets more intense than toddlerhood.
No. And my daughter just turned 3. And I said to my husband, I said, she's really angry. I'm like, oh yeah, this is 3.
This is 3.
Yeah, this is 3. And I'm like, oh, hi 3. And I actually love it. But it's full on. Right? Like it can be full on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would define 3 though as preschooler age versus toddler. Yeah. Toddler I would define as 1, 2. When they're toddling around and they're kind of still a bit nonverbal and falling over all of the time.
Yeah, probably you're right. Yeah, I'm probably moving a little bit ahead here. Yeah. So toddler. Yeah, toddler holding space. Well, it looks different, doesn't it? Because it looks like frustration, because they're pre-verbal and they want to do all of the things and they often want to control things, but they can't.
Well, why I said I think this is the hardest is because I think it's the highest need phase.
Yeah. And on a parent, right, to watch them move, to make sure they're not climbing, jumping off.
Yeah, right, exactly. Literally can't take your eyes off them for more than like 30 seconds.
Yeah. The toaster or the PowerPoint or
or even just moving around, or they just, they've thrown the thing, now they need another thing, you need to clean up, now they need the it's just like this constant moving.
Yeah, gosh, it is. It's actually all consuming, that phase.
Yes, and constant whinging, because there's always something that they can't quite do for themselves. And so the whinging comes out of the frustration.
And this is also when it's so important to understand the developmental perfection of it, because if we don't have a developmental lens on this, we can tend to take it either personally or judge the child, not when we don't have a context for it.
Yeah.
I think it often can help you to have that lens so that you give yourself a break and your child more of a break.
Totally.
The tiny little person with a tiny little brain trying to figure out the world.
Yeah, totally. And also they have an incredibly short attention span for most of the time when they're that age, because they're just learning so much. It's like this constant sparking. And so you never feel like, where at 3, 4, and 5 in, that preschooler phase, you can get periods of self-play or periods where they lose themselves. In that really early phase, what is that? A minute?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And then they've tip something out all over.
Yeah. You're not sitting next to them on your computer doing some work while they, whatever, have a snack, watch Play School. That's not happening.
No, not at that age.
No. So I actually think this is the hardest, and it may not be for everyone. I have no doubt there are those parents and mothers in the world who are like, this is my age. Like, this is the age that I relish and adore and love. Amazing. But let's just talk about it in terms of holding space. When I think about that age, I actually think it's harder to hold space because there's so much less space mentally and physically for you as a caregiver.
Yeah.
It's easier to hold space when there's stretches in between where you don't have to.
Yeah, because you can, you almost get to fill yourself up before you have to then go and hold space again. Whereas toddler intensity is there is no off switch. Like, if you're the caregiver and that's you all day, that's a lot, and it can even be the simplest of things. It's as beautiful as it is, how slow they want to walk down the street and pick every flower. And it's simultaneously gorgeous and frustrating.
Yes, it is.
As a mother who's also got 1,000 tabs open and everything else she has to do.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's also the relentlessness. There is no on and off phase. It just rolls continuously. So I think it's a really challenging phase to hold space. But I do also think, as you have said before, Bridget, that often the infatuations we have with our babies will be bust in our toddlers.
Yeah. Yes. This is a really great, I don't know, the evolutionary biology point of human development fascinates me, right? So let's imagine babies have to be cute in order for us to not abandon them, right? They're actually designed to be cute and make cute sounds and do all of
that. Dopamine is just getting hit up and hit up and hit up.
Right? And then sometimes we've ended up infatuating with them so much that we've lost ourselves in them, we've undermined them and their capacities because we're all over them. And so of course they then have to move into a developmental phase that works to break our infatuation with them as they need to take up more space and more agency and more selfhood separate from us.
Yes.
So it's perfection. And to the degree to which you infatuate with the baby, and I can remember when Hugo was a baby and I look at my friends who all had toddlers and I'd be terrified. I'd look at these toddlers on these preschoolers and just go, oh my God, because I was so infatuated with my baby, right? And so then I of course did all the reading and figured out all of the stuff. to help myself prepare for that next stage that I knew was going to thrust me into my unknown and to into the place when my nervous system was like, I got no map for this. Because it's really big. And it's big for us and our identity because we see them so definitely moving beyond us too. Like they don't need us as much. And in them not needing us as much, are we okay? And that it's also useful for us to feel the relentlessness because it also then gets us to sometimes go, fuck, I need a breather.
Right, this was my point. Yeah. So both those things kind of converge at this same age, asking you to create more time for your self-autonomy, well-being, and centeredness.
Yeah.
So when we're having the conversation around holding space, I don't know that it's terribly different to when they're a baby. Like they have a need, you listen, you're getting down on their level, you're not standing above them.
Yes.
Your body is open, you're breathing and regulating really deeply. You're focused on their experience, not your feelings and experience. You're paraphrasing back to them so they feel understood, even when they don't have words. Yeah, you really just hurt your big toe. You're really angry. I said no to having that banana. Like it's those really basic principles, but it's the fact that it's so many times in a day. Like you could do that 40 times easily in a day.
Easily, yeah. And so that's also why having that lens or that focus on like, them having a hard time and this being difficult for them, just as much as it feels hard for me, can help us get out of that orientation to our own feelings and our own overwhelm, which I think is so important because otherwise we end up feeling resentful of their needs, which are really legitimate needs. But if we haven't also made room or found a way to get our needs supported, it does feel relentless. It does feel overwhelming. It does feel all-consuming because it's a season that is naturally designed that way. But also the mothering of that child in traditional society would have been more shared.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is why, I say to every mother, like, you can have all of the beautiful online communities, you can have all of the beautiful, like, social media following that help you be the better parent, but you also need other adult nervous systems or other containers that can hold you so that you can get a breather.
Totally. In fact, I have a new little baby side project podcast coming up called The Deeper Practitioner, and I interviewed Rhea Dempsey on that the other day. And she was talking about this very thing. And I thought, how wonderful to have such a lived experience of that. She said, because I'd said to her, how did you do this in the 70s as she's, at the forefront of ABA and childbirth education classes, and she's a stay-at-home mum to 3 kids. Like, how are you doing all of these things? And she said, what's really fascinating to me is it isn't like it is now, and nor was it for my mother. She said, I can legitimately remember at that time, so even in the 70s, 1970s, her mother coming down from the country to stay with her and her 3 kids in the, relatively inner city, and her taking the kids with her on the tram to go to the market to buy the fruit and veggies to come back home. And she said her mother was exhausted afterwards and literally said to her, I don't know how you do this. I never had to do this. Wow. My kids never came anywhere with me. They were they were dropped at aunties next door and aunties over the back and aunties down the road. We never took our kids to any of the places that we needed to be as women and mothers who are functioning a home and a house and a farm. And kids were never with us with those things. We just shared it amongst an entire community.
Which is kind of beautiful, isn't it? Because it's beautiful for the parents to have that little bit of spaciousness, but it's actually beautiful for the children to not have to keep being asked to enter adult environments, like supermarkets that are set up like not for a child's nervous system, but yet we continue to put them in there because our lives require that of us, right? And then everybody loses their shit.
Yeah, totally. But I just think it's such a lovely reminder to remember that at no point in history has anyone, and certainly no mother, had to do what we do now.
Yeah. And also at the same time, it's conflating with the overwhelming pressure on modern mothers to be perfect.
Exactly.
Right. So you've actually got these circumstances where it's all on you, not like it used to be. And you've got all this responsibility, but you also have no power. in which to fulfill that responsibility. Like you have to be in an extremely privileged position to tick off what it means to be the perfect mother that our culture upholds.
Yeah, right. And even then, I mean, I've certainly met some of those women who would have night nannies from the minute that the kids are born. I've even been friends with some of those night nannies. So that legit is a thing, in case no one knew. It was like shocking to me. I was like, what is this?
Yeah, I guess there's a whole industry of that, right? For the woman
industry
who can still try to hold both, hold both worlds up.
Yeah, so you have the day nanny and you have the night nanny and you have your meals cooked by a chef. You pay them, once a week or twice a week, and they do all of the kids' lunch boxes, everybody's breakfast, everybody's lunches, every dinner. It's all packaged up, ready to go. You have the drivers. Like, it's just, I have watched that, right? And even then, they still don't feel like they're kicking goals either.
Yeah. Yeah, because, they should be them, or would be what they've probably internalized.
Probably, yeah. So I just think it's flawed all round.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we move on from holding space from toddlerhood, then it's preschool years. So that 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
You're right there now, Bridgie.
I'm right here now. And it's interesting. Like, I actually had to call the school the other day because I was stuck in Woolworths with my 3-year-old. He was having the biggest release of feelings she's ever had in a public place. And I was quite frankly shocked that it was going on, actually, because she's not really like, I don't know, like she's my kind of chiller in comparison to, all the stuff that all the journey I've been on with my other 2. And so she just woken up from a nap, and that was part of the problem. But yeah, it was getting closer to like time that I had to get out of there. And I was really, this is not going anywhere. Like, she wouldn't even let me pick her up. She was absolutely beside herself. There was no capacity for reason. There was flailing body, arms everywhere. She was like almost hyperventilating. Like, she was extremely gone, right? So I'm sitting here in Woolworths just thinking, wow, okay, yeah, we're here. Sitting on the floor with her, just trying not to let her kick over all of the stuff off the shelves. And it was so interesting just observing myself have like one foot in the other kids who I had to take care of. So I called the school and had them sent to the office. And one foot in my experience, and then noticing like the parts of me that could really meet her and hold her, and then the parts of me that were getting irritated because this wasn't in my plan, right? And then also the other parts of me that could feel the observations and judgments and like different points of view of all the people, all the passers-by. Yeah. By this point, the whole supermarket could hear her. And so holding space at that age is part of, I think, what gives us the power and the capacity to hold space, is to see these kinds of releases of feelings as functional and not dysfunctional, as healthy and as healthful, and as something that sometimes a little brain needs to do when it's extremely overwhelmed or dysregulated. And that part of that coming back into regulation is a release of the feelings, and is the sweating, and is the crying, and is the flailing, and that we don't need to control that. And that how can we be with ourselves and the internalized judgments that hits for us around this child's expression, and be with our child in that.
Yeah.
And sometimes we will, and we'll hold it beautifully. And other times, we won't, or we will, and then we'll collapse, which is kind of what happened with me, because then I got to school, picked up my kids. Sylvie told me that I didn't get to see her speak on stage in front of the whole school because I didn't know she was going to be speaking on stage, and I burst into tears, right? So that was my release, because I'd held so much, right? I'd had all of this emotion coursing through my body, mine and my daughter's, and then I just needed the perfect little stimulus, and then I had my cry. So holding space at that age looks like accepting that this is functional, first of all, and not something to fix. Yes, it's to look at, what's the different stimulus for my kid and why might they be having more of these, intense moments, but also accepting that it's actually developmentally normal.
I really love that, because I do think that just, again, having that cognitive understanding really does allow you more spaciousness, doesn't it, when you can really anchor the meaning? Because
otherwise you're in this, you shouldn't be doing this, why are you doing this, what's going on? Like, if you don't have context, you can't have as much presence.
Totally.
Because if you don't have context, you're sitting in this place of should, and you're wanting it to be anything other than it is. And as long as you're wanting it to be anything other than it is, then you cannot be present.
Yeah, totally.
So it's part of, yes, accepting that this is normal. Looking at, are my expectations reasonable of my child? Like, certainly if I do too many things in a day with her, she's going to struggle in some of those things, because she's at an age where if there's too much stimulation, then she needs to release all that overstimulation.
Yeah.
It looks like accepting that aggression is going to be part of the way that they're going to express their frustration.
Yeah.
And how can we safely set boundaries with that without going into all of our own triggers around it?
Totally. We're just jumping in to let you know what is happening in the worlds of bridgetwood.life and julietenner.love, in case there's a little opening for you to jump in and expand your life a little bit deeper. So what's happening in your world, Bridge?
It's Mothermorphosis, a free 3-day series all about identity, your motherline, and your parenting from the lens of the ways in which we are constantly transforming and evolving on this motherhood journey. So I really invite you to join that. We begin on Sunday, the 11th of September. Sign up at bridgetwood.life. And you, Jules?
Is Queen School. So Queen School is now an online course with 4 full modules that you are self-paced and work your way through, combined with 12 months of really stretching that out as I help you really integrate, embody, and move through the blocks so that you can literally become Queen School in your life. So Queen School is all about connection, pleasure, sensuality, magnetic communication, feminine energy, and embodiment with me over now a beautifully integrated 12-month experience. So you can find out more at julietenner.love.
What else would you say, preschooler?
Look, I do feel like it's a really different experience for me being with number 4. So she's just turned 5. And I mean, every time you go through that age, you just heal a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And so therefore everything you kind of don't worry about as much easier, because legit you're like, this is cool.
Yeah.
We're no problems. I'm not fighting this. I'm not rejecting this. It's just like, okay, this is cool. So by the time I've done that 4 times and I'm on my 4th go at 5, it's a very different experience to my first go at 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
Incredibly different.
Yeah.
We wonder why our children are so different. Well, because we are. They're parented different every time.
That whole idea of I parented them the same. It just simply cannot be true, because you are a different person.
Yeah, you are a different person each time. So by the time I get to number 4, and she is 5, I just actually care less. Yeah. I actually just am detached less to all of it. I don't care so much. It's not so intertwined with my sense of self-worth and identity that I met her every single time today, or I didn't. Yeah. I'm not keeping track. It's not like a checks and balances in my head anymore, and it used to be something that I could pride myself on or something that I could flagellate myself with.
Yeah.
It's not that anymore. I'm just not attached to it anymore. Because I actually see it more. I see the wholeness more, and I see the perfection in family dynamics. And I can tell you, as a family of 4, it is not always me who listens to her.
Yeah. Well, it couldn't be.
No. Her relationship that she has with her siblings mean that almost half my mothering job is done by her siblings. That's incredibly different as an experience where I'm it as baby number 1.
Yeah. And being it as baby number 1 when you're hitting these stages for the first time is, like walking your own underworld.
Yeah, totally. But I have consciously walked that.
Yes.
And this is my 4th time. So I do feel like this is kind of like the boons. I've walked the path of fucking fire. Thank you very much. Yeah. I will take the rest.
Yeah. But for the mother who's like on number 1 or 2 going, really, this is still fucking hard. I'm like, yeah, it's going to still be hard because there's parts of our nervous systems that are requiring to be met here.
Yeah.
That are kind of like super green and like going, hey, do you know this was here? Come check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And so I feel it a bit differently. And she definitely is more of a needs space to process on her. She likes her own space to process, which I can actually see was exactly as my first. She's actually very, very, very similar to my first. Even neurologically, my perception is. So the way that she moves in the world feels like, for me, like a bit of deja vu. So it's so interesting for me to self-observe how different I am from 1 to 2.
Yes.
From those 2 kids, 1 and 4.
Yeah.
And with my son, I was so heavily invested in the aware parenting that when he would retreat from me, I would chase him because I would need to know that I was close to him.
Yes.
Not because it was necessarily the best choice for him, but I was following a set of rules that said if you weren't there, they were damaged.
Yeah.
And that they weren't old enough to have that level of space yet. I don't see it that way anymore. So she really, and she's an exceptional, as we've talked about on this podcast before, I injected myself into play with babies 1 and 2 all the time. I thought that was my job, and then they couldn't play without me. So with babies 3 and 4, I was really conscious to allow them time to be in their own worlds that I didn't need to inject myself into or judge myself for not being part of that play. Yeah. So babies 3 and 4 do a lot of self-play. Just by virtue of me allowing that, what I perceive to be a natural unfolding, as opposed to interrupting it.
Like, but managing your own anxiety, because it's such a great point to make, because how often in order for our need to be needed and valued, do we insert ourselves into it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. If you perceive it's a never-ending list of needs, it will be a never-ending list of needs. If you perceive there's all these pockets of space and time where I get to be in my own world and my own experience and my kids don't need me, that will also be your experience.
100%.
So, she does a lot of her own inner world stuff, quite a lot. And I recognize that she chooses that too when it comes to regulation.
Yeah. Because play is regulatory.
Yes, but even when she's had a huge emotion, sometimes she'll want me to witness that and be with her. And sometimes she actually doesn't.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is the respect in our relationship to trust her more, which I never had with my first.
Yeah.
And in doing so, it actually is like so much easier for me.
And in doing that, and that being easier on you, it also means you can bring more of you when you are with her.
Yeah. It's not, the relentlessness isn't there. I mean, she's fiery as fuck, but, it's just, I think all of us just find it so adorable because we've been so practiced and stretched at it. It's not as hard anymore.
Yeah. You're not on edge waiting for the explosion. You're like part of the experience of being having a 5-year-old in the house.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if there's any wisdom there for anyone, but
it's also helpful too to know your thing. Like, I know that witnessing and being with anger in my children is a trigger for me because I perceived that it wasn't acceptable for me as a child. So I know when I start to feel the activation in response to my children starting to have an outburst, I know that that's my work. That's it's my little spiritual path, one of my many spiritual paths, right? And so knowing that, I can expect it more, expect that it's going to hit me, in ways that other things might not. And that's okay, because
almost plan accordingly.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Know what I need. And I actually spend a lot of time regulating my nervous system. I didn't realize, but I think I have since I was a child, singing. So that vagal tone that happens from singing is how I adjust to the intensity that happens in my nervous system with the stimulus that comes at it through my children's anger or through their big feelings, right? So also look at the ways that you've become beautifully adaptive to meeting those things too. in yourself and in your child, because we also have these naturally adaptive, hopefully not too maladaptive, ways that we do meet intensity. And so how can we also see that we're not missing all of these things as a parent, but how do we already know how to be with this? And see this thing as a stretching that our child's offering us, and not just, oh my God, they're doing it to me again.
Totally. I love it. So then we have the primary school years, and maybe we'll just do, I mean, I know it's not going to do justice all of the different micro, changes that occur from a child that's 5 to 12, let's say. We'll just kind of do a brief overview of potentially what that's like. What I perceive is that holding of space, again, happens less frequently because there's more space. They're at school, they're away from you, they're playing with friends, they're at activities, there's way more physical space.
Yeah.
So the amount that you're holding does stretch out over periods of time. I also perceive that often it becomes more physical.
Yeah.
So more physically violent, more physical hitting, kicking, punching things, throwing things, chucking things over.
Yeah. Language can sound more violent because they're bigger as well. So they might start using like more aggressive sounding words or tones that, because they're getting bigger, can feel more intense to us too.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So when I think about holding space in those years, actually, I've had a really beautiful reminder of that recently. This mum was going through a really hard time, and I had said to her, look, I don't know if it makes you feel any better, but my hardest time in my whole parenting career is when my son, my eldest, my first, was 8 to 9. Like, it was by far the hardest point in all of my parenting, because there's something that happens, and my perception is more acutely in boys or in testosterone-fueled bodies than those that are fueling other female-based hormones. Steiner and other philosophies and other cultures and spaces of time, this is when they've traditionally, the boys have gone with men and they've gone bush, they've hunted, they've had a rite of passage experience of some sort. There's a recognition that something shifts and there's a separation from the mother and more towards the father as an archetypal understanding and self-autonomy. And so there's this fuel of testosterone and violence and defiance and all of these things that really like rears up at that time. Or certainly that was my experience. It is what I see in the world. And I had said to them, I don't know if it makes you feel better, but that was certainly my experience, because her child was, yelling, swearing, saying, I hate you, yelling, I'm leaving the house, running out of the house and away from her, not going to school or doing whatever, or all of the things. And I was like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's super intense. Of course it is. And also, I would argue, also on the spectrum of developmentally normal at that age.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helps you position it in your head as like, okay.
But like,
as
maybe
opposed
you're not failing, and maybe there's
right. Like, what if this is just like, this is what it is. How do I learn to be with this, as opposed to moving into panic mode or crushing in on my own experience of what my child's doing to me and what my feelings are about it and how I can't cope.
Yeah.
What is it like to just go, okay, this is a kid who's really struggling right now.
Yeah.
And this is their flight mode or fight mode is the best they can do for themselves right now. What help do they need? And I can tell you, this was the time that I learned most acutely how important community is.
Yeah.
I didn't learn that in any of the infant ages, but I certainly did by this age.
This, in fact, that point about community, because my son was at those ages in lockdowns. And I thank the gods every week, actually, that he had a best friend in our street and our mothers tag teamed looking after those boys as they moved their energy, as they played, as they rode bikes, as they played sport, because he so needed an outlet that couldn't be provided in any other way than physical. But if we're not that way inclined ourselves, then we can sometimes fail to set up those things for them, which then also makes it harder to be with the other side of all of those unexpressed feelings, or, feelings of low self-worth, or aggression, all of that stuff. And so, yeah, to your point, I know you're continuing on, but yeah, like community where that you can lean on and that you can share the care of that kind of transition is really important.
Right. I mean, that's such beautiful language around it. Sharing the care at those points in transition is just the most beautiful language. So what I came to realize was, and as I had said to this mother, for me, it's not about punishment or reward at this time at all. This is about, is my child regulated and safe, or are they dysregulated and unsafe? And that's it, the end. So if there's
no need for anything extrinsic or arbitrary like punishment or rewards, because if you're just looking at this child and their nervous system and you help them feel safe, then a human who is not in a threatened mode is not going to be threatening, right?
Right. Because their natural state is connection and cooperation. Yeah. That's the natural state. So if they're not that, what's going on? Yeah. What do you need? So what I loved was on my hardest of hard days where I could not and I didn't know how to and I was out. What I loved is that I could ring, again, like you, the mum of his best friend round the corner. This is the beauty of having schooling and processes of education and therefore social systems that are close to where you live. Yeah. Is I could ring her and say, this is where I'm at. I just need to know that he can go somewhere and have a reflection of himself that is about, I love you, I see you, you're beautiful, you're worthy, because I couldn't give him those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's important is that he has that. And he will find that. And he will either find it in destructive ways and communities, or he will find that in constructive ways. And that for me as a mother was, what am I putting in his path?
Yeah.
Because he's going to find it.
Yeah. Whether you put it in his path or not, he's going to find
right.
it.
Exactly. It's not missing. It's just morphed form from me into what?
Yeah.
So being able to ring his best friend's mum and say, he needs to get out, he needs to move his body, he needs to regulate, remember who he is and be loved. And she's just like, has, of course, very aligned parenting philosophies to me, loves in such a, hugely mother archetypal way. Like, he would be so loved. Yeah. And she was like, yeah, just tell him, chuck him on his bike and walk around. And I had the moment of going, right, you can go. He didn't even want to talk to me. You can ride your bike, you can go around to your best friends. And having that moment as he left the house going, is he going to make it there? Is he going to make a choice on the way that's not that? Yeah. Can I trust him again? What's my strategy if I ring the mum in 10 minutes and say, is he there? Or she hasn't texted me to say he's here. What am I going to do? So it's all of this stretching and building of the perimeter that they now have that's larger than you and your hand reach.
Yes.
And so he rode around there and he spent the rest of the afternoon, evening with her, and she just loved on him super hard. There's another big family of 4 siblings. And they played basketball, they played on the trampoline, they ate food, and she just loved him.
Oh, how beautiful.
And right? And he came back connected and ready to reconnect with us.
Yeah, beautiful.
So I just had this visceral memory of, they just need places to go that are safe and reflect a beautiful version of them when they themselves are feeling like they are ugly or unworthy, which all of us, natural human state, when we feel like we don't belong to a family of origin, feel.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with us.
Yeah, so that we feel untethered and therefore unanchored and therefore unsafe.
Yeah. So I really love that in any direction in my community here within, I don't even know, I'm not very good at, space, but anywhere in this suburb, my kids could go and easily there's a home in nearly every street where there's someone that they could go to. Basketball, community sport, the community of the school that we chose, the communities and relationships that I've fostered outside of those experiences have meant that there is a vast network that holds my children because they will stretch beyond me. It's important that they do.
Yeah. So
we can either help foster that or not. So when it comes to listening, Be prepared for intensity because the intensity ups. It's way more intense.
And they get taller and they start to almost get as tall as you. So then it's like...
Yeah. They're bigger. You can't pick them up. You can't manhandle them. You can't physically move them if they don't want to move. So your entire holding space relies on relationship and on you holding your own space bubble regulation.
Yeah.
And that you're the one that now leaves the room if you can't cope. Not them. So I think all of those things, would you add anything to that?
No, I think you said it beautifully. Yeah. And then you have to take over the next one because I haven't hit teens yet.
Well, what I love about teens, well, also I just want to say first up, I fucking love teens. They're so glorious and wonderful and interesting and funny and awkward. And the whole experience just feels to me like just biting into the best, tastiest, crunchiest apple. Like I just love it. At the same time as they're the biggest assholes you'll ever meet. Like it's almost like that baby phase, you know, when you were like, oh, I love it. And God, it's exactly like that. I
even see like little threads of that in tweenhood, like some of the back chat or some of the tone, right? I'm like, oh, my husband was said at one point, he's like, he's really like, maybe a bit rude to you. I'm like, yeah, he is. And I think part of this is a bit of tween stuff. Like he's coming into an age of like testing and like, you know, like throwing it out, dishing it out and seeing how it's going to land.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So when we talk about holding space, what I'm reminded of is to love them more, like pay attention to all of the times and really absorb all of the times that they're not assholes, because it really does help you remember how whole they are, because when they're assholes, it's full on.
Yeah, it feels like they're only ever assholes.
Well, and it's just huge, right? I mean, my son is 6'5".
Yeah. Wow.
So he's huge. And has a profound vocabulary, and of course is wired as such, knows every single one of my buttons pristinely well. So I am literally having in a moment of conflict with another adult.
Yeah. That at least looks like an adult, right?
Yeah, totes. I mean, brain function totally different, but yeah. But when I say I'm having conversation with an adult, I'm thinking about this in terms of respect.
Yes. Yeah, so you don't get to talk down to him or minimize his experience or shame him and or do all the things we culturally do to children. Right.
And don't problem solve it. So I was talking to, again, a mum the other day, and she was like, you know, my teenager who's in between my two came in the other day and, you know, here's the problem. And she said, well, I went, well, you know, what you need to do is, and off she came with all these things. Then she tells me this story and she ends it with, and then at the end of all of this, and I've come up with all of these fantastic ideas and ways that she can deal with this situation, she turns around and she goes, I just wanted you to acknowledge that I felt sad about that today. And you didn't. And she walked off. And so this friend of mine was like outraged at the fact that she had the best ideas and her child would not take them on board. And I'm sitting there going, I mean, I love this. I love this friend and I don't judge any part of it, but I'm listening to that going, this is the difference between listening and not listening in teenage years.
Yeah.
That is actually the nuanced difference in holding space.
Because all they actually want to do is be listened to, but we, in our desire,
strategize.
We strategize because we also know how treacherous the teen years can be. And what our experience was that we don't want them to repeat. And so in order for us to have control, we go into problem solving. Yeah. I'm assuming.
I mean, I'm sure you would see it as well. And my husband actually is shocking at it. So it's a continuous.
My husband will be terrible at it too.
Oh, shocking. And there's so much of his parents that I actually am witnessing coming out in him now that I'm like, oh my God, okay. This is so it's a continuous conversation with Nick and I on, you know, we don't have to come in with the solutions. This is just about, it's really shit. You know? And even for my daughter who, you know, will say it's probably not a day that goes by that she's not like, I don't want to go to school today. Right. I can either get super plugged into that. Or I can just be like, you really don't want to go to school today. It's really shit. That must feel really bad. Oh, do you look like you're really tired? I'm not holding fear of what happens in the next moment when she won't go to school.
Yes.
I'm trusting this is something that needs to be uncoiled and witnessed from her body, and she will self-regulate and work out what to do on the other side of that. This is tears in another form.
Yeah. And so your work is not to bring in all the reasons why she can't stay home, or all the reasons, oh my God, does this mean she's going to be a school refuser? And does this mean she's not going to go to school? Does this mean that her whole future is going to be ruined? Like, you've got to like totally keep all that like behind you.
Right. Exactly. And instead, what used to be, you know, huge, big, fat tears just looks really different in teenage years. It looks like defiance and being bogged in, and it looks like a spectrum of mental health, of anxiety and depressive states and over-exaggeration of whatever the thing is. It's the same deal, but you've got to see it as the tears of the 3-year-old. Rather than trying to make it mean something that's perhaps more adult and cognitive. It's not. They just want you to see them where they're at. They just want to know that you've got relationship with them, because I can tell you in teenager years, if you don't have relationship, you've got nothing. Punishment and rewards stop working. So if you don't have relationship, you have not got a foothold.
Which just it reaffirms the importance of that relationship from the get-go.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's not built overnight. It's built because you did that when they were 3 and when they were infants and when they were 8, and, you know, all of those things. So holding space for teenagers, I think, is about remembering how much they just want you to see their experience and how much they do not want to see your experience.
When I was your age.
Don't want to know. Give no fucks. Do not have the brain capacity to even contemplate that. Maybe in another 10 years they might.
It's so true.
Right now they just want to be the center of the universe.
Heard. They just want to be heard and seen and like met.
So it is things like, you know, talking to them about the game, talking to them about the thing they're doing, being with them in a different way other than strategizing. Is what I would say, and recognizing that you've got to be with your own nervous system and giving yourself lots of breaks to hold that capacity.
Beautiful.
So, Bridge, what have you got going on in the world that we can jump into?
You can still jump into Disrupt, Revealing the Mother Wound. So you can catch the replays on our first live call. You can make your way through the modules. They're bite-sized for you to digest wherever it works in your life. And then, of course, join us for the Women's Circle to integrate it all. So find out more at bridgetwood.life. And you, Jules?
I have Queen's School, which is now a 12-month integrative process that I guide you through, walk you through, so the content of the 4-module online course becomes really part of your beingness and how you show up in life and relationship for magnetic communication and all things feminine energy and embodiment. So you can find out more about that at julietenner.love.
Beautiful. Remember to nourish the woman, to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively into your life, then head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.